Finally, the sages tell us that Nadav and Avihu, these two sons of Aaron, refused to be married. They wanted to serve God with no interruptions, with no distractions, with no requirement to split their time and energies between family and my relationship with God. And so, that also is considered a sin on their part. As much as their intent was positive. It's not that they didn't want to marry for some debauchery or immorality. It's that they wanted to be able to devote every waking hour only to God, whether in studying Torah or teaching Torah or fulfilling the commandments or offerings in the temple, whatever it is. They didn't want the distraction of a wife and children. Nevertheless, that's considered a sin. All four of these are different, but all four of them are based on the same basic common denominator. What's called rotzoi bli shoiv. Desire without check, without control. Our desire to serve God is wonderful and absolutely needs to be there. But God is the one who decides how to serve Him. We don't get to decide how to serve Him. And so as much as they wanted to bring an extra offering of incense, that's not up to you to decide whether to do so or not. As much as they wanted to drink a little bit, to say a little l'chaim and then go serve, that's not up to you to decide to do that. They wanted to tell the person what the halacha was. They didn't want to get married. That's not up to you to do that. God says, this is the law for this is the law for that. I decide how you should serve me. And only when we follow through with both components, desire to serve, but then the proper control and direction to serve according to God's will, then we don't have any problems. Anything outside of that, unfortunately, is actually not very good. Towards the very end of the third aliyah, the priests are instructed not to imbibe wine before performing temple service. This is the reason why, if you remember to Simchas Torah, obviously, Simchas Torah is one of the biblical holidays, and so we have Birchas Kohanim, the blessing of the priests, on Simchas Torah. But unlike every other example of a biblical holiday, when we have the priestly blessing on that holiday, when the priestly blessing is done in Musaf, towards the very end of the morning service, on Simchas Torah, it's done specifically in Shachris, in the morning service, not the additional service, earlier. And the reason is that technically, after Hallel, before Musaf, you can already drink. You can already say Kiddush, have a little bit of mezenis, a little bit of cake or something like that, and then drink. And then you can do Musaf later. Though that's practically not what's done, technically it's allowed to be done. And therefore the universal Jewish custom is, lest the Koyanim get a little bit too happy on Simchas Torah morning, they should do their currently available service, namely the priestly blessing, in Shachris, before one can actually make Kiddush and drink. And then whatever happens by Kiddush is fine, and then we're going to have the Musaf with no priestly blessing at that point. The fourth aliyah. Moses addresses Aaron and his sons, instructing them regarding the consumption of that day's offerings, despite the deaths of their next of kin. They are basically told that yes, in a normal scenario, when a Kohen is an oinen, when a Kohen has had a close relative for whom he has to sit Shiva, pass away and not yet be buried, it's the most severe level of mourning that there is. It's while a person's close relative is not yet buried and his entire focus is on the burial of that person, to arrange and to go through the funeral process. So generally speaking, a Kohen in that kind of a situation does not serve, because he's obviously not going to be able to focus on servants. He's going to be focusing on burying his close relative. But if we were to apply that rule, that general rule, in this exceptional situation, we would have no service at all. Aaron is the high priest, but it's his two sons that passed away, so he would be an Oinen. He wouldn't be able to serve. The other two priests in the whole of the world are his two other sons, who also have to mourn the passing of their brothers. So we can't use this rule, we can't apply this rule, lest we have no service on the very first day of when the tabernacle should be functioning in its full capacity. And so Moses tells them, function, do, serve offer as if nothing ever happened, and the Jewish people will mourn the passing of your two relatives, of your two sons or your two brothers, respectively. From here, we learn that when a venerated sage, when the leader of the generation, for example, passes away, not only do his immediate relatives have to mourn him because, again, he's an immediate relative, but in fact the entirety of the Jewish people are required, to a lesser degree than close relatives, but nevertheless required to enact a certain level of mourning, because in essence they are bounded to that person spiritually, even though biologically they might not be close relatives. The fifth aliyah. Moses becomes aware that one of the sin offerings had been burnt rather than eaten. It should have been, a part of it should have been eaten. When he expresses his displeasure, Aaron explains his reasoning for ordering the burning of that particular offering, and Moses humbly accepts Aaron's explanation. How exactly is it that Moses is wrong, and how is it that Aaron disobeys Moses? Based on this narrative, we see the distinction of the roles that Moses plays and that Aaron plays in their leadership of the Jewish people. There were on that day 3 sin offerings. One was the sin offering because it was Rosh Chodesh. Remember, this particular day, as special as it is with the erection of the tabernacle, etc., is also just another Rosh Chodesh, just like there would be every 30 days or so. There was the sin offering of the beginning of the offerings of the princes, of the leaders of the tribes. Once the tabernacle was ready to be erected fully and completely and finally, and the altar was to be dedicated, each one of the tribes with their respective prince brought a particular offering or set of offerings, and one of them was the sin offering. This particular one was the sin offering, the dedication offering of the tribe of Judah, Nachshon ben Aminadav, Nachshon the son of Aminadav. And then finally we had the fact that it was the erection of the tabernacle, which in and of itself also has its own sin offering. Aaron and his sons do exactly as Moses says. They consume the sin offering for the fact that it's the erection of the tabernacle, the dedication of the tabernacle. They consume the sin offering from the tribe of Judah as per Moses' instructions, as if nothing ever happened, nobody passed away, and they're not in mourning. But when it comes to the offering, the sin offering for the fact that it is Rosh Chodesh, that is the one that they do not consume at all and rather have it be burnt. Despite the fact that Moses said, consume all the offerings, don't change anything in your behavior or in your service. And that's the one that Moses is asking about. Aaron responds that, look, there is a distinction to be had between the first two, where we followed what you said, and this one where we had it burnt, where we didn't follow what you said. The sin offering related to the day that the tabernacle is erected is a once in a lifetime or once in a, in forever situation. There's never going to be another day in the history of the world where the tabernacle will be finally and comprehensively erected. Therefore, despite the fact that we're mourners, we didn't change our behavior because it's something that once it's gone, it's gone. You can't make it up later. So we ate from this sin offering. The same is true for the sin offering as part of the dedication offerings of the tribe of Judah. Yes, there's going to be another tribe that will do their offering tomorrow or another day, and for 12 such days, but the tribe of Judah's offering, that's only today. Again, once in forever. You can't make it up, it'll never happen again. Therefore, again, we did not change our behavior as if we are not mourners, even though we are. We ate from that offering. But when it comes to that third one, the one that's about Rosh Chodesh, the one that we had burnt, that's not a once in a lifetime or once in forever scenario. That's going to repeat itself every single month. And so that shouldn't trump the fact that we are mourners and that we really shouldn't be serving. And so for that one, we actually didn't consume it. We actually had it burnt. And Moses accepts Aaron's explanation. As much as Moses is right, this is the scenario, this is the law top down, black and white, boom. Aaron and the whole job of the Kohen is to take that law and to properly, never compromising or somehow washing down the actual law, but to apply it to any given scenario. Moses connects the Jewish people to God from above to below, whereas Aaron connects the Jewish people to God from below to above. And so in this scenario, Aaron is the one who says, look, this situation is not exactly black and white, therefore we approach this situation in our service not black and white. The sixth aliyah. God gives the commandments of kosher, explaining how to distinguish between kosher and non-kosher animals, fish and birds. Animals are a category unto themselves. They require slaughter. They are the coarsest of all three of the categories. Birds are the next one in that they are somewhat less coarse. They only require a little bit, they require slaughter, but in a very kind of a simpler way. And then fish actually don't require slaughter at all. Taking them out of the water is considered their slaughter, and you don't actually need to do anything in particular as to how to process the fish in order to make it kosher. For that reason, these three categories exist in the first place. Kosher animals, meaning land animals, must chew their cud and have cloven feet. Fundamentally, all of these laws and requirements, as we said earlier, are statutory, just because God said so. There is no logical reason why a cow is kosher, but a pig is not. The concept or the idea that somehow kosher land animals are cleaner than non-kosher land animals is absolutely incorrect and stems from a simple mistranslation. The verse says, here and in Deuteronomy, do not employ the word unclean or dirty. They employ the word impure. And the mistranslation is really what causes the misconception. Purity and impurity is a question of something spiritual. Clean and unclean or dirty is a question of something physical. A human being, for example, can be incredibly dirty but pure. A person who just came out of the mikveh and is completely purified from any and all impurities during temple times, etc., all of a sudden has a bucket of garbage thrown on him. He's dirty, but he's pure. In the same token, exactly to the opposite. A person could be just out of a schwitz, a sauna, a hazmat, whatever, completely clean, disinfected, the whole 9 yards, but he's still impure. The one has nothing to do with the other. Therefore, fundamentally, all of the laws of kosher are just because God said so. That said, there are some insights that, as it were, God allowed for us to have through the different sages and commentaries over the years. And they explain that the characteristics of the animals that are not kosher are characteristics that we do not want to incorporate into us. And the characteristics of kosher animals are characteristics that we do want to incorporate into us. So the land animal being the coarsest of all three categories, we want to mitigate that coarseness with a little bit of humility. And we certainly do not want to expedite or kind of embolden that coarseness with more haughtiness. So the kosher land animal has to chew its own cud. The idea of chewing the cud is, in the analogy, rather than have a certain set of information or facts that I mull over and make a decision, as it were, swallowing that cud, and then done. I don't want to revisit it anymore. Right? I had a question as to what to do in a particular scenario. I did some thinking, I made a decision, and I'm not willing to revisit it. That is the non-kosher animal. It chews, swallows, done. A level of haughtiness. The level of chewing its own cud means chewing, swallowing, regurgitating, chewing again, swallowing, and maybe several more times. A scenario where I thought I knew what I was going to do, but now I'm deciding, because of a little bit of humility, to revisit the question and remull my decision. Cloven feet. When we have an animal that has non-cloven feet, let's say like a horse, it looks at itself and sees nothing beyond itself. That's a level of haughtiness. A cow, for example, that has cloven feet, looks at itself and sees beyond itself, recognizing that it's not the end-all of the universe. That is a little bit more humility. The Torah lists 4 animals that have only one of these attributes, but not both, and are therefore non-kosher. This additional blurb is seemingly unnecessary. Once the verse says that the 2 necessary characteristics of chewing the cud and having cloven feet is what makes an animal kosher, a land animal kosher, you don't need to say, oh, these particular ones are one but not the other, and they're also not kosher. I already know that they're not kosher. As soon as they're missing one, and obviously it doesn't matter how, if they're missing one of the 2 required characteristics, done. 2 are required. I don't have 2. It's not kosher. But nevertheless, the Torah does list 4 specific species that says that this is, one characteristic but not the other. Furthermore, the list of 4 is split into 2 subcategories. 3 of those 4 species, the hare, the hyrax, and the camel, do not have split hooves, but they do chew their own cud. And then the final one is the pig, which has split hooves, but doesn't chew its own cud. Again, I don't need to know all of this. The fact that they don't have both of the required characteristics is all that matters. They're not kosher. One of the kind of takeaways from this is that if a human being or a group of human beings had written the Torah rather than God having written the Torah, it wouldn't make practical or logistical sense for them to be so specific in particular so as to be found out later down the line, whether very quickly or not as quickly down the line, that in fact, look, there's an entire universe, entire world of zoology that we didn't know 3,000 years ago, and we found 10,000 other animals that have one characteristic and not the other. And nevertheless, they put it in. And lo and behold, 3,300 and whatever years later, there is not a single other animal of all of the newly discovered species that would violate what the Torah says here. In fact, to this day, there are only 4 species of animals that have one characteristic and not the other, and they actually divide into these 2 subcategories of the 3 having one and the one having the other. Kosher fish must have fins and scales. When we look in the Mishnah, however, the Mishnah tells us that, look, fins you don't really need to worry about. Scales is really what matters. Because if a fish has scales, it automatically has fins. Not vice versa. If a fish has fins, not necessarily does it have scales, but if it has scales, for sure it has fins. I go into my local fish shop in Kiwani. I cannot rely on the sign that says, oh, tilapia or salmon or something else. Whether because the guy could lie if he wanted to, or because there are different subspecies generally known as, let's say, tuna. There are impure tuna. There are tuna that are not kosher, and then there are tuna that are kosher. So he might not even be lying, but it could be a misunderstanding that for me, obviously, is a big deal because I'm eating something that's not kosher. The one thing I care about is seeing scales. Or even seeing the skin where he cleaned off the scales and you can still see the little divots. As soon as I see the scales or some remnant of the scales, I know that it's a kosher fish, even if I never see fins, because the scales guarantee that the fins are there or were there. That's as far as the practical halacha Jewish law goes. But as far as the deeper meaning for our service of God, fins are what allow the animal to travel through the water. Scales are what protect the animal from all of the different elements in the water. What guarantees progress, what guarantees fins, is if you have scales. If you have that which will protect you from the negative influences around you, you are guaranteed proper and kosher progress through the world, through life. Scales guarantee fins. The other way, it doesn't work. Fins do not guarantee scales. Just because you are making progress does not mean that you will eventually not succumb to some negative element from around you. You cannot rely on fins. You can only rely on scales, which will then guarantee fins for a proper kosher fish. The Torah then gives a list of species of non-kosher birds and species of kosher locusts. The Torah then discusses the ritual impurity caused by coming in contact with the carcass of a non-kosher animal, as well as certain species of rodents and amphibian creatures. The seventh Aliyah. We learn of the possibility of foods and utensils contracting ritual impurity if they come in contact with any of the aforementioned impurities. The Torah then mentions the impurity contracted through coming in contact with the carcass of a kosher animal, which was not ritually slaughtered. We are commanded not to consume any insects or reptiles. The commentaries say, nobody would want to really eat insects. It's not like a common thing that most people like. Even though there are some kitchens, where it's a delicacy, that's certainly the exception and not the rule, and for millennia has been that way. So what's the point of making that commandment? Other than the fact that it's wrong, but if a person's not going to want to do it anyway, we don't need to necessarily even state it. So here the sages say that God will give you the reward for not doing something, even if you're not doing it because it's just something you don't necessarily want to do. Is that the ultimate way in serving God? Certainly not. The ultimate way in serving God is to do it because He said so and you want to fulfill whatever He's commanding. But in fact, even if you're doing it only for the fact that it's just not what you want to do, but technically, of course, fulfills God's will, that also brings with it reward. The reading closes with an exhortation that we remain holy by abstaining from eating all forbidden foods. The famous explanation of why this is connected to holiness is because eating is so corporeal. Because eating is so physical and so corporeal, and at the same time we are eating the way that we are eating because God said so, then that is the ultimate combination of the spiritual and the physical, which again harkens back to the very beginning of our Torah portion with the tabernacle. Para in a nutshell. In preparation for the upcoming festival of Passover, when every Jew had to be in a state of ritual purity, the section of Parah, the red heifer, is added to the weekly reading this week. Parah relates the laws of the red heifer, with which a person contaminated by contact with a dead body was purified. This had to be done every single year in order that the Jewish people could come to the temple in order to bring the paschal offering. Because of the special maftir, we have a special haftarah as well. This week's special haftarah mentions the purifying waters that God will sprinkle upon us with the coming of Mashiach. This follows the theme of this week's additional Torah reading, the purifying qualities of the red heifer. The prophet Ezekiel transmits God's message. The Israelites have defiled the Holy Land with their idol worship and immoral ways. As a result, they will be sent into exile. And they came to the nations where they came, and they profaned my holy name. Notice, we profaned not God,